So, looking at the concepts that we've covered, this section was pretty packed full, right? Understanding first how to use local storage, how to write code, to place the user input by updating that all those items, right? Again, we're looking at array of objects in my case. It doesn't necessarily have to be for yours, but saving them into your local storage, splitting out your code, your application code is really good. I think it's that we're definitely at that point, and I think this is for sure helpful. And then doing the refactor and debugging, I didn't actually review too much because we've already been debugging inside of Chrome. And then I am going to, for this particular Learn Together, jump over the complex rendering because I want to focus on these two. And then I'm going to come back around to the rendering of a little more complex DOM. And this is where you saw Andrew put in check boxes and added some functionality into the render of those items from local storage. Now, having said this, it is really helpful if using these dev tools, you actually walk through and watch this code work. Okay. And I say that because there's so many different things going on right now in our code. And because now we've added this additional functions JS that has, in this case, the functions for my example, getting save task or saving the task, right? So we're using these two functions to say, okay, go place that into local storage and then get this out of local storage. And then when we get this out of local storage, we then are keying off of or using this global reference for whatever you've named it. I named it tasks per day to then iterate when I'm actually rendering my task. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And the way you can kind of keep this organized is, again, use your dev tools to see how his code is doing and using this idea of local storage, right? So really, I just tell you, I think it would really be beneficial once you finish this code along is to actually spend a little time going through that step by step. Okay. All right. So now, having said that, let me come back to my code here. The one thing, and he showed this, but I think it's worth showing here, is when you want to look at what's in local storage. Okay, you can come into the application, right? So we've been mostly focused on sources. So you can come into application. For me, this is, here's the notes, here's the to do. So the tasks are the ones that I created through my decision code. And I can see I have 4 objects in that local storage. And again, not again, but the idea here of understanding the difference between why when we save it to local storage, we need to stringify it, right? Stringify it. And I think he gave a pretty good example of that. But you can really see this when you look at this output. So all of this is in strings, even if there's numbers in here, which in my case, UUID, which is something we'll do in this Learn Together. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But even though actually, this is alphanumeric character string, but it doesn't matter because everything is stringified, placed into or stored into local storage. And then when we bring it back out, we have to parse it. And we're writing the code that handles that, but understanding that's what you're doing. So you get it back out, then you parse it, and then it becomes what we're used to with a standard object. So spend a little time if that didn't quite land with you, understanding the difference or just what stringify and what parse is doing with that local storage data. Okay. So again, your dev tools are really helpful. Remember that when you can at any point, and this is good, like if I did tasks per day, right? Now my code has already stopped running, but that task per day, which is what I have from looking and what my code is doing by going out to local storage, and it returns my task, I can go to the console and look at each one of them. And also, if I'm just running code and I'm stopping at a particular point, I can also just go down and reference that to look at it in maybe more detail. But if you look around in DevTools, you will see these items just by scrolling over them, generally, depending on if you're in that function or not, what is being stored into that item or into that variable. Okay. Okay, let's come back here to my, now let's come to look at the actual instruction, okay? So I want you to implement local storage for your user, your input data, which should be your user, right? Because you may be your user, which most likely you are, right? And then render that updated data into the DOM with minimal validation. And that's what we learned last week. And I'm actually going to extend validation this week. But remember, right, if I just hit this, I've used that required. At minimum, do that. But you're going to see a little more validation in a minute. Okay, so also create your functions.js and place your functions into that file and link from your index, right? And make sure you get that order right because he talked about making, because you want to have your functions loaded before your app.js. And then implement the UUID. Now, this is really not that bad because all you're doing first is you're linking to the external UUID file. Again, I've given you the code for that, but let me just move over real quick and show you, right? So for me, in my script tag, and here's why I'm going to say this, repeating what I said in the attendance, is that's why this is so important, because there's been other links given in the Udemy course that don't work. This one does work, which I was really happy to see, because the other option I have shown in past semesters is just to copy that JavaScript file. But it is real world where you're using somebody else's code implemented in your own to leverage that concept, that developed idea. Okay, so going back to my JS. So once you do that, then all I did is before I actually created my object, which I was going to push, then I just said I ran the function, and then what comes back is a UUID, and then I just place that into my object, and then I push that object into that array, and task array object in this case. Actually, I could have just called this task object because there's not an array here. That would have made more sense, right? So pushing that in there and then saving it, right? So now we're calling this local storage, and then we render task per day. Remember, this is what I was saying before, when you're running save task, at this point it will be in your functions directory, right? When you're doing save task, then your task, for me, whatever you're passing in, is the thing that gets updated. So now, as soon as you do that, because it's passed by reference, your task per day in my example then has that newly updated item on it, and then you render it. Okay, so again, this is the importance of understanding the step-by-step process of what happens. You gather the data, right? You run your own code to determine whatever data that you're processing, right? You create, in my case, it was an object. You then push that in to that array of objects. I save that and then I render it. Okay, and then for me, I cleared it. And this is what is good to know how to do, is to clear that form, because that is very common functionality. Okay, so get these three working before you look at step 4. Now, step 4 is something I've been kind of talking about that I'm going to have you do this week. And here, let me show you, and then I'll actually talk about it. So what I want you to do is add, and I'll just drop this. You're going to add link to a form. Now we do have a form here, but what you're going to do, and I'll just show you if I link to this form, you're going to actually watch a video and you're going to code along. So you're going to end up creating this file, which is a form.html, and you're going to create a script.js file. And what will happen is you'll watch this video to actually code along with and Web Dev Simplified. This is, and I was looking at this today. It's a little bit older, but it is still really good content. Okay. So a couple things here is you're following along, you're coding along, you've created a new file, you've linked it, and this is the aref. If you don't know how to do, right, you just search aref to add a aref, and you can find this all over the web because it's one of the most common tags that we use, where we're saying, here's the link text, here's the link itself. So if you need help, reach out for help with that. Okay. So let me come back to here. Let me come back to my form. Right. So let me just show you one of the things he does is a little preview of some changes what we're going to see, which is he uses what's called an arrow function. When he does this, just know that you can just write function here and still reference the E as well. He does that, but he just writes what's called an arrow function. Arrow functions, I think, come up for us in the next section. Okay. And then so I just want you to think about this. So the reason I'm having you do this is on Thursday, I'm actually going to say now, let's take our minimum validation and let's add some new functionality. And this is one way to add some simple form validation, right? And he talks about that this if statement basically can be handled by the required attribute, and all of this would be custom validation code that we're then pushing, right? If I onto the page by doing this inner text, something we've done text content or inner HTML, and he's using a new thing called join, which is taking this array and joining it together so that whatever messages, error messages, but the point of this assignment is just to see this, is actually to code it up and give you some thought, because I want to start having us implement, because that's the one thing I think I would say about Andrew's course, and I love Andrew's course, is that I wish he would have introduced more form validation sooner in the course, because it's real world, and for us, for our Dev 1, and just for in general, you want to know how to do some form validation. So hopefully that explanation gives you, right, the idea that you're going to, from your index, I didn't say this, so let me just be clear. Let me bring up my editor real quick. Right, we are creating a W5M. I'll put that in the write-up. So you end up with app.js, index.js, right? Functions, because you placed your functions into that file, and then the script.js. Now, one thing I definitely kind of had to resist doing was actually cleaning this up, but I thought, well, it's okay. We'll leave it like this, and you can kind of see as you walk through it, you could kind of think about how could we clean this up, and the simple answer would be here, right? Is just take some of this form validation and put it right into what we've already done. But I felt like that was a little too much, and I want to give you enough time to have coded this up, to think about it as we move on to Thursday's items. Okay, so after you get all this working, again, I recommend making sure you've nailed these before you move on to this one. This step 4 has nothing to do with the stuff that we've covered in the course. It is this external video. You're coding it up, making it work in order for you to implement it into Thursday. Do your Git workflow, provide your Git hack link, write something about doing this work, and reply to 2 of your fellow students for full points. Whew. All right. Have fun with this. I did actually. This was kind of fun for me. I just had to resist renaming things and making it the way I wanted it, but that's part of programming. Have a good one. Hope you had fun.